So, good morning, everybody. I am Sanober Mir, Professor and Head Department of Biosciences, and as you are already aware, that we'll be uh, discussing the Unit 2 and Unit 3 of Research Publication and Ethics. I'll just go through the content that I'm going to conduct. So we'll be talking about definition of publication ethics, introduction and importance. We'll be talking about best practices, standard operating procedures. We'll be talking about the guidelines that govern publication, best practices in publications, conflict of interest. We'll be also talking about responsible conduct of research. We'll be talking about what are the guidelines for authorship, contributorship, what are good laboratory practices, identification of publication misconduct. In fact, what contributes to what is called as scientific misconduct, and what are the guidelines that help us in responsible conduct of research. And then we would also be talking about predatory journals. We'll be talking about the Beals list and many other websites that deal with retracted work, because a lot of publishing houses uh, have entered into the realm of predatory journals. So why they are called as predatory, and why citing these non-scientific kind of publications is not good for us. So we'll be dealing with responsible conduct of research, and so firstly we need to know what is responsible conduct of research. Why do we need to conduct our research responsibly? What will happen if we are not, conducting our research responsibly? What are the repercussions that we are going to face, right? So I hope that you are well aware of why research publication and ethics has been introduced by UGC. So UGC has introduced RTE. It has made it mandatory that all the research scholars should be instructed in the paper called as research publication and ethics. So there was logic towards introducing this paper in the curriculum. Earlier we were studying research methodology only, but we were not studying research publication and ethics. So there is a logic why research publication and ethics has been introduced in the curriculum. What do you think would be the necessity? It is to educate. It is to make people, research scholars, aware that why it's necessary to publish ethically and maintain the highest standards of morals, right? So this is the reference material. I hope you have taken pictures, but I'll also be sharing the reference material with you. How many of you identify this gentleman? All of you, I guess. So I would start with the great words of this gentleman, Einstein. He says that many people say that it is the intellect which makes a great scientist. According to him, they are wrong, because it's the professional character of a person. So whenever we talk about ethics in general, or ethics in publications or in research, we have to we have to understand that we are talking of highest moral standards. We are talking about a moral compass in research. So according to him, intellect is not necessary, it's the personal character of the scientist that is important. So when you are able to maintain your own highest standards of integrity, regardless of what others may do, you are destined for greatness. So maybe hundreds of people, everybody around you is not following the highest standards of ethics, but that does not mean that that is the correct way of doing research, or correct way of conducting your everyday life, right? So it is very important to maintain good quality of research, because is your research impacting anybody? Is your research impacting anybody? Who is it impacting? It's impacting the society. It's impacting everybody around us. So if the research is false, obviously we are not making a good impact. We are not contributing in a positive manner. So all the research work has to follow some kind of guideline. So, well, academic research involves many coordinated steps. I think you must, by now, you must be well aware of how you are going to organize your research protocol, how you are going to write your synopsis, what is hypothesis. So, academic research involves many coordinated steps and processes. What are they? Appropriate study design, study execution, data collection, data analysis, and finally publication. Publication comes at the end. And why do we publish our work? What is the need to publish our work? What is the need to publish our work? We want to disseminate our information. We have done 5 years of work, say. We have done 3 years of work, 5 years of work, and rigorous research work we have done, right? So we need to disseminate it amongst the masses. All those people who can benefit from the research should know about your work. So publication comes at the end of the life cycle. Initially you have to decide that your study plan is design is good, study execution is being done properly. Properly means you are maintaining your data properly, you are maintaining monitoring the data, you're not falsifying your data, you're I mean, if you're going for data collection, it's not like that you're collecting data for 10 samples and reporting 100 samples, isn't it? Analyzing it, data analysis also is a step where you have to take care that you're not falsifying your results. And finally, publication. So in publication also you will maintain the highest standards of ethics. But so one should, before we can maintain any standard of ethics, we should know what is the guideline that we have to follow, isn't it? What are the guidelines that we have to follow? So one should be aware of ethical code of conduct that binds researchers at every stage. Which stages are we talking about? We are talking about the study design, study execution, data collection, data analysis, and finally publication. All the steps are coordinated, and at every step you have to maintain quality, right? So you cannot design your work inappropriately, right? Data monitoring has to be done properly. So you should be aware of ethical code of conduct, isn't it? So generally, Committee on Publication Ethics is an international forum for COPE. We call them as COPE guidelines. So I told you that we have to adhere to some set of guidelines. We have to maintain our data, maintain our research by adhering to a set of guidelines. Who gives these guidelines? COPE, Committee on Publication Ethics. It's an international forum of editors and publishers of peer-reviewed journals. So, COPE guidelines provides a code of conduct and best practice guidelines that define publication ethics, and it advises editors on how to handle cases of research and publication misconduct. So, whenever somebody is reported or somebody's research work comes into question, we refer to the COPE guidelines to find out whether the research was done properly, whether the facts were reported properly. So we refer to the COPE guidelines. What is COPE? Commission on Publication Ethics. So the short of the long story is that we have a set of guidelines that we have to adhere to while designing our work, while executing our work, while monitoring the data, while analyzing it, and finally publication. Now the question arises, why do we need to publish ethically? So a single piece answer to that would be, if you want your research to be cited by respectable research groups, if you want your research to count, you need to publish ethically. So make your research count. They say that if you have to make your research count, you should publish ethically. So whether you're just starting out in your career as you are, right? You are all starting out in your career, or you are a more seasoned researcher, you are no doubt very much aware of the importance of ethical conduct. So whether you are starting in your career or whether your PI is the person who is conducting the research, both of us have to follow the same set of guidelines So what contributes to research misconduct? Plagiarism, research fraud, undisclosed competing interests. There are just a few of the issues that can threaten not only the integrity of the science, but also one's standing in the scientific community. So I'll come back to the previous question. Why do we have to adhere to a set of guidelines? Because firstly, we want our research to count. We want our integrity to be safe because the research that we are doing, we are investing a lot of time in our research. We are investing our personal time in our research. So we do not want some, unimportant work to be disseminated to the masses. You would also be, when you are designing your study plan, you would be referring to some papers. Don't you refer to papers? So if the paper you have referred to was a bunch of data which was not authentic, so will it affect you? Will somebody's misconduct affect you? Yes, it directly affects us because we start research by referring to somebody's data. If the referral point is not authentic enough, we'll be building the story on a false foundation, right? So in the process, we'll be losing lot of time. In the process, we'll not be able to get the results because the results were falsified. Earlier results were falsified, right? So the need to conduct research in a proper manner is basically that you need to disseminate the right information in the community, in the scientific community. Because somebody is referring to your work, somebody is going to use this work for building projects, isn't it? Government may be funding your work. So do you want the exchequer's money to go into dustbin? No, we do not want to do that because the funding also comes from the taxes that we pay. So at the end of the day, the exchequer's money should go into productive research and research which would have some societal benefit, isn't it? So we should not be disseminating false information in the scientific community. That is why we need to publish ethically, right? And understanding of the ethical boundaries and rules is paramount to ensuring your work and career gets off to the best start possible, right? So, how much time are you interested in investing in your PhD? I hope you all are interested in pursuing your research in the ethical way, right? So 3 to 5 years must be in your mind. So that is a lot of time, isn't it? So you would want that whatever work or whatever results you are going to get at the end of your PhD, it should benefit the masses, right? So these are the top 5 reasons which tell you to publish, why you should publish ethically. So the first reason is it ensures scientific progress. There's no alternative to truth. Truth is the foundation of science and the progress of ideas, right? Isn't it? Isn't truth the foundation of science and progression of ideas? Because ideas will be built upon your work. I told you earlier, your work will also be a stepping stone towards building of another project. So if your project is not truthful, we will be building upon false ideas. So truth is the foundation of science and the progress of ideas. The scientific community thrives only when each participant publishes with integrity. So it's not about only publication, it's about design of the work too. It's about data monitoring. If we are monitoring our data properly, if we are documenting our data properly, the other person who is going to benefit from our research will also use monitor the data, refer to the correct data, isn't it? So truth is the foundation of science. Build, put it in your minds today. Take a pledge that we'll be always truthful, we'll be honest. Even if we are not getting results, we'll not take any shortcuts. We'll try to troubleshoot, isn't it? So will you try to troubleshoot? Yes, you will try to troubleshoot your work. If you're not getting results as you want them to be, please find out why you're not getting, but do not falsify your results. So first reason is it ensures scientific progress. What is the second reason? It protects life and the planet. So publishing ethically ensures that we have the trusted information we have the trusted information on which we build future therapies, technologies, and policies. So our research may be a basis for some policy document. So if the basis for a policy document is incorrect, obviously the policy document would also be incorrect, wouldn't it be? So we protect life on the planet by publishing ethically. So there is a lot of emphasis on the publication because when you publish, that is how the world comes to know about your work. You may be doing your work in the lab, right? But nobody knows about it. How do they come to know about your work? When you publish the work, right? So when you publish ethically, you save the planet. If you are ethical, if the culture around you is ethical, it will promote ethical behavior. So we'll have a culture of ethics. We'll have a culture which has strong adherence to moral guidelines if we adhere to, if we personally adhere to the correct behavior. Do you agree with me? Yes. So what happens when if somebody is lying or cheating? Is it infectious? Is this behavior infectious? Lying and cheating is also a infectious behavior. Similarly, honesty can also be a infectious behavior in the sense infectious not in the real sense of infection. Good ethics breed good ethics, and we create an ecosystem where ethical behavior becomes a culture, right? So that is why we have to publish ethically. That is why we have to adhere to a set of ethical guidelines whenever we conduct research. This is the reason why so much emphasis has been put on responsible conduct of research. So I gave you 3 points. The fourth point is it is good for your reputation. What is good for your reputation? When you perform your work responsibly, when you report your work honestly, it builds a reputation. You build a reputation. Whenever somebody sees a paper authored by you, they will quickly know that okay, this is a paper from X group. So they do not have a history of unethical behavior. They will trust your work. So it's good for your reputation. There's nothing like getting published and being able to accept credit for that. And finally, it is the only way, right? There's no shortcut. It is the only way. Being ethical is the only way. Do not ever think that you can take a shortcut, falsify your result, will not work honestly and report a dishonest result because that is not the correct way. This is the only way. Publishing ethically is the only way. But then why do we get so many reports of unethical behavior, right? So I hope you are aware of the 5 reasons why you have to publish ethically. Now I would talk about what are the steps where we have to keep the ethical guidelines in mind, right? What are the steps? Through the entire study, you have to keep ethical guidelines in your mind. What is the first one? First one is approval and consent. So, if you are designing a piece of work which involves human volunteers, if you are designing a piece of work which involves survey work with somebody in maybe in your neighborhood, in the urban neighborhood or in the rural neighborhood, and you are going to perform a survey on them, you need to have their approval, and they also need to have clear understanding of why this particular piece of data is being asked from them, right? So approval and consent is very important. So this side here, towards which I am referring, it talks about the checklist. So every time you have to keep this checklist handy. Okay, every time means when you start your work, you should maintain this checklist on your desk, research desk. Why? Because you will keep on ticking boxes, you will keep on putting the cross mark or a Take mark on the boxes. I hope you are aware of a checklist, right? Isn't it? What is a checklist? Do's and don'ts, right? So we will put a checklist, put a tick on what we do not have to do, and we will put a, tick on what has to be done or cross, right? So in the first step, you check the box. So do you have approval of the relevant regulatory authority, institutional board and ethical committee? So whatever your study plan will be, if it involves human volunteers, if it involves work on animals, if it involves survey work, that involves volunteers from the neighborhoods, you have to make sure that you have all the clearances in place. So if you mark so if we so this first point should be tick mark. You will only proceed when you have a tick mark on your first point, right? What is the second point? If you are conducting a clinical trial, have you registered the clinical trial? Again, it will depend upon your PI and it will depend upon the information that you have. So if you are proceeding for a clinical trial, you need to have permission for the clinical trial. So many people would be from humanities and management. You mostly get your data from surveys in which you send a questionnaire to volunteers, right? So those volunteers need to have clear understanding of why this data is being asked from them. So at the end of every questionnaire, there should be a consent statement for consent. Okay? And you have to save these consents because they will go representative consents will go as a part of your thesis. Do you understand that? When you submit your PhD thesis, at the end of the PhD thesis, you have to have a representative unfilled copy of your informed consent. Enough? Then second point is what is the second point? Data accuracy, right? So you have designed your work. You started out with the design of work. Second thing is data accuracy. Whether the data that you have collected from a survey or from research labs, whether that data is accurate or not. So what are the questions that you are going to tick mark? So the question that you are going to ask while you maintain the data is that is there manipulation of material, equipment, process or data. So should you have tick here or cross? You will have cross for all of these because there should be no manipulation of data, there should be no manipulation of material, equipment should not be uh, what manipulated, and data of course cannot be manipulated. So you have to take great care. Have you double checked data for accuracy? How will you double check the data for accuracy? How do we double check the data for accuracy? You must have studied research methodology. How will you make sure that the data is correct? How many times will you repeat the experiment? Will you do the get the questionnaire? So if we are working in a research lab, we have to at least put the experiment 3 times. Okay, the triplicate. We have to have the experiments in triplicate so that we will be very sure that whatever result we are getting, that is a authentic result. Because maybe for the first time we had got a particular result because of chance. So next time when we repeat it, if we get the same result, we know that the result was the same. It's not because of chance that we got the result, right? And third time maybe अगर same result आएगा तो means that that is the correct result. Okay, so 3 times we have to repeat a particular set of experiment, and within assays also we have to put the slides in triplicates. We have to put the data, put the experiments in triplicates. Okay, so data accuracy has to be checked every time you analyze the data, and you will of course be adhering, will also be applying some statistical parameters, right? So your data. When you analyze the data, you'll be subjecting them to different statistical parameters, the tests, which will tell you whether the results are significant or not. Then only you can report them. So now you have maintained your data, you want to publish it. So you are writing the publication now. You are writing the manuscript. You are going to report your report what? You're going to report your research. So you write a paper, isn't it? You start writing your paper. How will you start? How do you start? How do we start writing the paper? We of course refer to the previous sources. We read research articles. When you'll be designing your synopsis, you will read research articles and research papers which are required for your research problems, right? So what you have to do is you have to absorb the information from them and then write them in your own words. You cannot just pick up columns, or you cannot pick up material from the previous literature and cite it as your own. That process is called as plagiarism. You cannot just copy and paste the research papers. You will, of course, refer to the research papers because we call it research for a reason. Why do we call it research? Because we are building on something which already has been done. So, not we are not repeating the entire research set, but we are building on the previous result. We are trying to extend that work, isn't it? Unless it's an original idea, but still the idea would have been in literature somewhere, right? So when you are when you are in the process of writing your results and reporting your results, you have to make sure that you do not copy and paste the material. So have you used your own prior work or copied others' work? So what should the answer be here? We have used our own prior work. And if you have taken inspiration from somebody else's work, have you cited those papers? Yes, you should have a tick mark in this question. Do you have written permission for introduced material? So that means you need to have written permission from the authors for if you are using some material or some picture. So picture would be maybe uh, a picture that you some architecture student might want to use, or a design uh, which a person from art may want to use. So they need to have permission from the original authors, right? Are you getting my point? So you need to have permission for reproducing material, maybe a picture, maybe a figure, right? Then the fourth point is submission fraud. तो सबमिशन फ्रॉड क्या होता है? अब आपने पेपर लिख लिया, you have compiled your paper, put the right set of statistical parameters. Now you are ready for submission. You'll be submitting it to some journal, right? So what kind of fraud is constituted as submission fraud? If you are simultaneously submitting the same piece of work to two different journals. Okay. Okay. So many people resort to this practice to save time, but it's not an ethical practice. I must make it very, very clear to all of you that simultaneous publications is not a ethical practice because it wastes the time of the journal, it wastes the time of the reviewers because you're sending same piece of paper to two different reviewers and two groups. So two groups are wasting so much time on one manuscript. So simultaneous publication is also a unethical way. So have you published the entire work or part of it? So 5 years of work would generate lot of papers, right? So sometimes authors tend to they want to increase the number of publications. So they tend to break their papers into small pieces. But what happens, these small pieces do not give a, when they are combined together, they give the same result, right? So the conclusion of the studies may be the same, and if we had created one single paper from the publication, the result would still have been the same, right? So if you have such kind of data where the outcome is still the same, then you should not slice the papers into multiple publications. This practice is called as salami slicing. What is salami slicing? When you bifurcate your big study into small pieces and the outcome is not changed. If, sometimes we have big studies which cannot be reported in one paper. So, what we have to do at that point of time is, in those scenarios, we should be reporting the results, reporting correct results, of course, in such a manner that the stories should build up. Means you stop one paper at a juncture where the other paper picks up from the data. The story continues. It should not be that all four papers lead to one big result. Okay. So salami slicing is also a unethical practice. Finally, there are some ethical guidelines for authorship. What are those ethical guidelines? So we have to know who can be included as an author on the paper, who can be included as an author on the paper, who can be an author, somebody who has conceived the result, somebody no, not the result, who has conceived the study, designed the study, somebody who has actually executed the study will be a part of the paper. So you as a research scholar will be the first author on the paper because you would have executed a piece of work, and your supervisor can be the corresponding author on the paper because he or she must have conceptualized the work, right? So author can be somebody who has conceptualized the problem, somebody who has generated the data, a person who has helped you in analyzing the data can also be an author, right? So have you included all the authors in a specific pre-agreed order? So guidelines for authorship are, first you have to be very clear about who can be an author on the study. So who can be an author on the study? Tell me quickly. Though I mean we are live, so you need to answer faster, right? Who can be an author on your study? Right. So, somebody who has conceptualized, somebody who has executed the work, a person who may have helped you in analyzing the data, and writing work. Of course, all of you will do. Drafting of the manuscript will be done by all the people, so they can be authors on a particular paper. So have you included all the authors in a specific pre-agreed order? Please pay attention to this term, pre-agreed order. Pre-agreed order means we have to decide the authorship right in it's a good practice to decide the authorship right in the beginning of the study so that later on the conflicts of authorship do not arise. So if you have a collaborator or if you have a collaborator, if your PI has a collaborator, they need to have a written agreement, written consent from each other. They need to have a written documentation of collaboration, and it should be pre-agreed how the authorship is going to work, right? So most of the conflicts in authorship arise because there is no pre-agreement is not there. So always try to have a pre-agreement regarding authorship. You are just beginning your career, but I am hopeful that later on you would go into academia. All of you are working for your PhDs because you at some point of time want to have your own research groups. You want to be professors in universities, right? Isn't it? So that is why you have taken up this vocation, right? So for you, it's necessary to keep these guidelines in mind. Maybe because this at this juncture, as a research scholar, this may not be very important for you because your PI will be doing all these things. But when you become PIs yourself, you need to have a pre-agreed agreement regarding the order of the authors. So second question is, do you have an agreement with co-authors? Yes, you should have a tick mark for this question. Are the co-authors aware of the contents of the publication? It's a good practice to share the publication with your co-authors before you send it for publication to a publication house. It works, it works in two ways. When you send your paper to the co-author, he or she may be able to give you inputs that are beneficial for your work. You can improve upon the quality of your research work, and they will also be aware of what is being sent to the publication houses. Now the question arises: why do they need to be aware of all this? Why do the co-authors also need to be aware of the data that is being sent for publication? Because their name is also there. Very good. And since their name is also there, their reputation is also at stake, right? So if X is falsifying data and then falsified data is being published, everybody whose name is on that paper, their names get tarnished, right? So that is this is a responsibility of the co-authors to go through the data, go through the authenticity, whether the data has been harvested in an ethical manner. They have to put in that effort. Otherwise, they can tell to the PI that we do not want to be the co-author. Right? If they do, for example, they may not have time to look into the authenticity of the data. So they can very politely say that we do not want to be co-authors, right? If they have any doubts, right? So because their names are there, their reputation is at stake. So is there any ghost author or a guest author? You have to see whether you have a ghost author or a guest author in your authorship list. So again, we come to the question: who is a ghost author? Ghost author is somebody who may have written the uh, paper for you, but you have not acknowledged him or her, right? So there is a practice. It's an unethical practice actually. A lot of these publication houses write papers for research scholars. So that's not a good practice because at the end of the day, you're not getting trained in writing good papers because you are letting somebody else write your paper, isn't it? So when we write a paper, we get a chance to uh, analyze our data. We get a chance to get a under comprehension of what we have generated and how it's going to affect the broader picture. So when somebody else is doing all this work for you, you are not developing your research comprehension. So is that good for the society or is it bad for the society? It is bad because you will be training people later on. And if you are not well trained, obviously the next generation would not be well trained also. Ethics are very, very important. That is the only way. Remember it. Following good ethics, following ethics rather, they are always good, right? It's the only way for all of us. Alright. And finally, conflict of interest. So we have to be very clear about whether there is a conflict of interest. We'll talk about conflict of interest later on in our subsequent lectures in detail. So these are some parameters where you have to be very mindful whenever you are executing your study from design till publication, right? So do you have to be mindful of this fact that if we are skipping some portion, taking a shortcut, it is going to affect us? So taking shortcut in research is going to affect you in some way or the other. You are not going to gain, your research comprehension is not going to develop, your reputation would be tarnished. If you care about your reputation, do you care about your reputation? Everybody is saying yes, but I do not see so many committed faces, right? So yes, your reputation matters. The science that you are disseminating with the scientific community has to be truthful and honest. Science खाली research labs में नहीं होती है. anything that is done rationally, any problem that is solved by rational thought is science. So it can apply to problems in humanities, it can apply to problems in management, and so on and so forth. So we had talked about COPE guidelines in the beginning. So Committee of Publication Ethics was created with a mission to create a future in which ethical practice in scholarship is the cultural norm. So scholarship, we are all in the process of scholarship. So scholarship has nothing to do with money. It has to do with building your intellect, right? So to create a future in which ethical practice in scholarship is the cultural norm. So we are adhering to all these guidelines because we want to create a society where ethical practice is a culture. It was conceived by just three editors in 1997. What was conceived? Coke. The committee was conceived by three editors in the year 1997. Now it's a fully multidisciplinary rather, international organization with more than 12,000 members worldwide. Okay. So how were the guidelines developed? The guidelines were developed from a preliminary version drafted by individual members of the committee. See, you have to understand that these three editors who started with the uh, idea of having a committee for designing guidelines for publication ethics, they did not do it for money. They did not do it on a time which was counted. They did, they developed these guidelines on their personal time, right? So you can well understand how committed they must have been to maintain the integrity of data, right? Because हम तो without any the practice now is that unless and until we have monetary gains, unless we are not gaining in some way or the other, we do not delve into those endeavors, isn't it? Am I saying something out of the norm, or is it the norm right these days? Do we take up extra work unless we are expecting a reward? That should not be the practice. Somebody has to act as a moral conscience of the society. Somebody has to act as a conscience of what is being published. So these three editors did all this. They formulated the guidelines on their own, and during this process, they went through thousands of papers. Okay, they went through thousands of papers and they evaluated them and found that there was a huge practice of what? Misconduct, right? So you have to understand why this committee came into existence. They analyzed lot of data and they found that okay, the data is not always disseminated in the authentic form. It's not harvested properly. Ethics are not being followed. So they came up with the guidelines. So their guidelines address study design and ethical approval, data analysis, authorship, conflict of interest, the peer review process, redundant publications, plagiarism. Their guidelines also talk about the duties of the editors. When we send the paper to an editor, what are the duties of an editor? They also talk about the duties of the reviewers. Like for example, you are reviewing somebody's paper, so the guideline will also tell you what are the facts, what are the laws that you have to follow and look for. Media relations, advertising, and how to deal with misconduct. So, COPE guidelines are very comprehensive. So, we should give some credit to the three people who came up with the idea of COPE. When was it done? In the year 1997. And now, what is there? 2023, like almost 24. So, after so many years, we still deal with publication misconduct, right? So that means the people are not aware of what? They are not aware of the guidelines, and even if they are aware, they are not adhering to the guidelines properly. So we'll come to those that part also, ki why people do not adhere to the guidelines properly. Maybe the punishment is not good enough, isn't it? Coming to the first part, let's go to the slide. So the COPE guidelines address study design and ethics approval, data analysis, authorship. So coming to this part, study, we start with the study design and ethical approval. So actually the video is not so great. So ethics approval, informed consent and data confidentiality. So how many people are from medical college? Are there any research scholars who will be working in medical college? None of you? No problem. So ethics approval will be required for all those people who are working on human subjects, people who will be working on animal models. So you need to have approval from the Animal Ethics Committee. So while you are designing your study, good research should be well justified, well planned, appropriately designed, and ethically approved. So good research, what is the definition of a good research? What do you understand by good research? When will you consider a particular piece of research good? When it's addressing a research gap, it should not be rehashing of the previous work. We should not be recycling whatever has been done previously. If a particular data is very, if the confidence, if we have a good level of confidence that a particular data is good enough, we should not rehash the same work again. We should try to design a work which has some impact. So your work has to be well planned. It should always address a gap. It should always be towards solving a problem. What kind of problem? Society, right? A problem which may be in your immediate surroundings, right? Do we have any problem in the immediate surroundings? Have you identified any problem in your immediate surroundings? That should be a part of your research, or a global, something which addresses local needs, something which addresses global needs. That should be your research. So it should be well justified. Means well justified money. What does it indicate? Sorry, Anita. It should be well explained and well designed. You should always be mindful of how your research is going to help others. What is the outcome going to be? Is that outcome useful to anybody, or is it just a part of your research thesis, which you will, we will manage to finish our research in 4 years or 5 years? But the research has to have some impact. It should be well planned. Every step of the research problem should be well planned. Your design should be well thought of. Spend more time when you're designing your research synopsis. So how will you write your research synopsis? When you proceed for writing your research synopsis, how will you write it? How will you proceed? You will proceed by reading a lot of papers. You will identify what is missing. You will then design your work around that missing part. So you always have to address a research gap. So to conduct research appropriately designed, of course, you would know how it has to be designed. So you have to conduct research to the highest standard of quality. So if you decide that to get your PhD, you will design some, spurious piece of result and get spurious piece of work and get your PhD in 2 years, that will constitute misconduct, right? Because you are already aware that the piece of work that you have designed is not useful to anybody. You are rehashing what has been done earlier. Maybe you are already aware of the results. You may have already created the results, so that is what would constitute misconduct. Okay, so do not design your research synopsis which is of low standard. Always think big, and you have the capacity to execute bigger ideas. I hope you have the confidence to say that yes, we will address a problem which through our research protocol. Okay. So what are the actions? So laboratory and clinical research should be driven by protocol and pilot studies should be done. So before you go for research in the field, you should perform some small experiments in smaller groups, find out what the result is going to be, and then go for the bigger study design. Research protocols should seek to answer specific questions rather than just collect data. See, I have been putting a lot of emphasis on this. Your research synopsis should not be a piece, your research, your PhD thesis rather, should not be a book which is just a collection of data. It should address some specific research answer, right? आपके PhD के बाद कुछ problem, maybe a smaller problem, it should be addressed. Okay? Protocols must be carefully agreed by all contributors and collaborators, including if appropriate, the participants. So protocols, whenever you design a research protocol, it should be, in principle, it should be agreed upon by all the contributors. So who are the contributors in your study design? You are, your guide is, the volunteers are, right? You know, of informed, whenever you take informed consent, you are making the volunteers aware of how they are an important part of your research. And the final protocol should be part of the research record. Of course, it is always a part of the research record. Now, coming to research record, what in your understanding is the research record? The final book or the daily notebook that you are going to maintain in your the daily data recording book. So all of you have to maintain an appropriate data recording book. So data recording books are there are specific guidelines for maintaining data recording books. So data recording books should have index. The pages should be numbered. So it cannot be a regular register that you find in the stationery shops. है ना? What kind of registers should they be? They should have an index which is maintained properly. Day-wise, the pages have to be maintained, and the pages should be numbered. So many groups, bigger groups, have transitioned towards digital notebooks. Okay, many big labs have transitioned towards digital notebooks. So you can put your data in real time, and at the end of the day, the data will get fixed, and then you cannot edit. These are non-edit. They are not editable data notebooks. Which ones? Digital notebooks that are kept for good lab practices. They are not editable, so the data gets fixed there and then. In our case, we maintain data recording books which have indices as the first page, and the pages need to be numbered, right? So that we come to know whether the page has been torn off or an additional page has been added. So please refrain from using these registers and refrain from using the spiral notebooks. There is spiral notebooks, we can always clear a page from them. So numbered notebooks should always be used for data recording. And you should maintain the data. If on a particular day you did not do anything, say for example today you were in the lab and you did not do anything, just write online, I just read a paper. I did not do any bench work. So it will also keep you, you will also remember what you had done on that particular day. And we can always refer to our raw data if we maintain the data recording book properly. Now, is data recording a major part of your research? Data recording is a very major part of your research because the reviewer may ask for your raw data at some point of time. So time stamping is very important, and maintaining dates and the time at which you had done the experiment should be there in the data recording book. So whenever you proceed with buying these registers, keep this practice in mind. Do not buy these regular registers for data recording. So early agreement on the precise role of the contributors and collaborators. This part also we have studied earlier, right? What was that? We had talked about that we should have a pre-agreement. If we have a collaborator, it's always a good practice to have a pre-agreement on our terms and conditions of collaboration, because we, in the very beginning, we'll know about how the authorship has to be arranged and what their contribution is. So it will give us a good idea about matters of authorship and publication. Statistical issues should be considered early on in study design. So whenever you are designing your work, you have to keep in mind what set of data will be statistically significant. So if you are working with 10 subjects, for example, will that study design be approved? 10 subjects. Subjects means, your samples, or, maybe your human volunteers. So will 10 be a good number? No, you need to have a statistically significant number. So your statistician or your supervisor can tell you that this is the number which will give us good result. So always we go for more than 50. Formal and documented ethical approval from an appropriate constituted research ethics committee is required for all studies involving people, medical records, and any other human tissue. So animals also, if we are performing a study on an animal, we require ethical clearance from the animal ethics committee. Use of human tissues in research should conform to the highest ethical standards, such as those recommended by Newfield Council on Bioethics and ICMR guidelines. In India, we have the Indian Council of Medical Research. So we have to follow their guidelines for any kind of research which involves human tissue or medical records. So medical records are also confidential. I hope you know that, right? So medical records are confidential. They should not be shared with everybody. So whenever we have to harvest data from medical records, we should have the clearance. Okay. Fully informed consent should always be sought. Fully informed consent should always be sought. So what do you understand by fully informed consent? What is informed consent? Fully informed consent means that you uh, whatever piece of data, or maybe you need to harvest blood from somebody, or you want to involve a particular person in your study, he or she should have understanding of what is the purpose of the study, right? In the language that they understand, right? So if you go and talk to somebody in, say, some foreign language, they'll not be able to understand why their tissue is being harvested, or why we are collecting blood from them. So fully informed consent means that they should be able to understand what is being done in the language that they can understand. So if they are proficient in understanding in Hindi, please explain to them in Hindi, right? And do not use lot of jargon. Some, jargon in the sense, you do not have to bombard the volunteer with so much jargon that he or she is not able to understand it. It is fully informed consent. So, the person should have clear understanding of why the sample is being harvested and what is the purpose of the research, and he or she will sign on the consent form. So when participants are unable to give fully informed consent, research should follow international guidelines, such as those of Council for International Organizations of Medical Sciences. So sometimes our research may involve volunteers who are not capable of giving consent. right? They may not be, they may have lost their comprehension. Cognition may not be fully there, or they may not be able to put their consent in writing. So at that point of time, we can adhere to the guidelines of CIOMS. Animal experiments require full compliance with local, national, ethical, and regulatory principles and local
Hmm.
licensing arrangements. So, whatever are the bottom line is that when you design your study problem or research problem, you should be well aware of what are the guidelines that you have to follow. So, each one of you may have to follow different guidelines, isn't it? Or are you going to follow the same set of guidelines? Yes, scope guidelines, all of you have to follow. But when you design your work, the guidelines that are to be followed will depend upon the research problem that you are addressing. For example, somebody is working in cyber security, right? So he or she needs to follow the guidelines for cyber security, right? If somebody is working in bioethics, so they need to follow the guidelines of ICMR. Somebody in pharmacy may be working on animals, so need to have the correct adherence to what animal ethics, right? So it depends upon which guidelines you have to follow will depend upon your research plan, but you should be aware of what you are following, right? So formal supervision, usually the responsibility of the principal investigator, should be provided for all research projects. Right? So research scholars should not be always on their own. It's a good idea to be on your own to ideate because you are the harbingers of new ideas, right? Your PI is not. You are the harbingers of getting new ideas because you will be reading more than your PI probably. So formal supervision, usually the responsibility of principal investigator, should be provided for all research projects. This must include quality control. So where are we controlling quality? From the beginning. When we had designed, we made sure that we are taking enough subjects. We are taking samples which are statistically significant. So we did not take a shortcut. We did not use 10 number of samples. We used 50, right? Because that was statistically significant. And then we go for frequent reviews. So how do we go for frequent reviews? Every week or every fortnight, you can discuss the data with your PI, and you can discuss the data threadbare to understand whether the data is significant or not, whether the results that you are getting, they are outliers or they are actually the accurate results. So that is only possible when you meet your PI frequently. You know? So you have to be in contact with your PI. You have to visit the lab every day, do your work, analyze your work, and get it checked by your supervisor, isn't it? So the primary responsibility of the data that you are generating lies with your supervisor mainly, right? So if your supervisor is lax, he or she will bear the brunt of your spurious data. Okay, you will also bear, but actually formal supervision is necessary, as they say. You cannot We cannot say that okay, the student brought this data, I have no awareness of what the student did. We cannot say that. We need to be aware of what the student is generating by regularly monitoring the data, going to the lab, seeing how the data is being generated, how the experiment was being run, whether it was run in the manner in which it has been recorded. So once in a while, we need to check all these things. All right, and the frequent review and long-term retention. Retention of what? Maybe up to 15 years of all the records and primary outputs. So the data recording book that you have, it should actually be deposited with the institution. So you should maintain one copy, make a photocopy of it, take it with you when you go, when you leave Integral University. But Integral University has the right to have your primary data recording book, because we need to we need to have retention of all this data for at least 15 years. So your data recording book should lie with the PI. Okay. Why? Why is it required? Why do we need to retain the data as well as the primary recording books? Why is it necessary?
For example, if we want to find any gap or any further research to be done,
Right.
we refer to that data.
So mainly not for any research to be done, mainly it's to address gaps. For example, somebody questions our data, uh, maybe 10 years down the line, so or 5 years down the line, we will have a repository where we have the original data. We can go back to that notebook and repeat the experiments and see whether they are getting reproduced or not. But if we do not have the data book, everybody will question our what? Will question our results, right? And we lose reputation that we have built for 20 years, 30 years, or whatever. है ना? So we have to maintain data and deposit it with the PIs, right? Then coming to data analysis. So data should be appropriately analyzed, but inappropriate analysis does not necessarily amount to misconduct. Inappropriate means maybe you have not put the right test, you were not aware. But the thing is that we always have access to statistician, a trained statistician. So before you report your results, take help from a trained statistician. They will help you in designing your work and analyzing your data appropriately. Okay? Fabrication and falsification of data do constitute misconduct. So data, what are the unethical practices in data analysis? What do you think are the unethical practices in data analysis? Reporting false data, generating data for more than what you have actually done. So fabrication and falsification constitutes misconduct in data analysis. Besides that, uh, misreporting. Misreporting means hiding some crucial information because it was not adhering to your hypothesis, right? So people hide the outliers because probably that outlier does not adhere to the hypothesis that they are uh, talking about. So hiding information is also a misconduct. All right. All sources and methods used to obtain and analyze data, including any electronic pre-processing, should be fully disclosed. Detailed explanation should be provided for any exclusion. So, whether when in the study design or data analysis, we have some inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria. We should clearly discuss what this inclusion criteria and exclusion criteria was. Methods of analysis must be explained in detail. So, the regular practice that we see in some of the papers is that the methodology is not clearly mentioned. So, do you think that is a good practice? Methodology, when we do not write the methodology in detail, is that a good practice? No, because it's wasting the time of the other researcher. If you are reporting the result, please report the methodology clearly so that the other person can just try to repeat the experiment by using the same method and they'll not waste time. So all the methodology, methods of analysis must be explained in detail and referenced if they are not in common use. Okay. So disclosure is important. Discussion section of a paper should mention any issues or bias. We have what is the general organization of a research paper? You must have read some research papers. So how is it organized? You have an abstract. Then you abstract is a summary kind of a thing of all the methodology, the problem, methodology, execution, data, and analysis, and the outcome. Right. Then you have introduction. Then materials and methods, results, and the discussion. What does the discussion deal with? Discussion deals with corroboration of the results or any study which is not agreeing with your results. When you discuss your results, you refer to material which was already there in the literature, and you also refer to all that material which is not agreeing with your results, right? So both types of results. Those results have to be discussed which are in agreement with what you are reporting, and the results which are not in agreement with what you have been reporting, so that you can give some basis of why these discrepancies are coming. And you also have to report any kind of bias that you might have had while analyzing the data. So discussion section of the paper is the soul of the paper actually. Okay, because that is where you will put analysis in practice, your comprehension in practice. Okay, this is the result that I got. X also got that result in the same setting, and Y got a similar, different result in the same setting. So that will force you to ask why, isn't it? Won't it force you? As far as my result, two people, why did they get different results? So that will also help you in analyzing what might be the mechanism of action, or what might be the reason for this change, right? So you have to report any kind of bias which may have been considered and explain how they have been dealt with in the design and interpretation of the study. Then we have authorship. We had talked about authorship earlier too. I had given you 7 boxes at which we have to make sure whether the ethical practices are being followed or not. So in authorship, what should we do? First, we should know how do we define an author on a paper, right? So authorship, they say that there is no universally agreed definition of authors. But now we have. Who is an author? An author is generally considered to be an individual who has made a significant intellectual contribution to the study. So intellectual contribution is necessary. I may have lent you a pen, for writing your research results. So I cannot be an author because I, gave you a pen or gave you a reagent which you used in your study. So based upon this exchange, I cannot be an author on your study. I should have made some intellectual contribution in terms of analyzing your result or comprehension, reporting of your result, in designing your work. So anybody who conceptualizes the work, executes the work, analyzes the work, and finally helps in reporting the work, drafting the manuscript can be an author on the study. As a minimum, authors should take responsibility for a particular section of the study. Okay. So nowadays, before we send a paper for publication, the journals have a practice of sending forms to all the authors on the study. All the co-authors get a form where they have to declare what their contribution in the paper was. So nowadays, the problems that we were facing earlier have been minimized because the publication houses have a very stringent checklist which they follow. So before our paper gets goes for review, all the co-authors are required to sign a form of contribution. So how they have contributed. The award of authorship should balance intellectual contributions to the conception, design, analysis, and writing of the study against the collection of data and other routine work. If there is no task that can reasonably be attributed to a particular individual, then the individual cannot be a part of the authorship, right? If there is no, if the author, a person who is part of authorship is part of the authorship on the paper, if there is no comprehensive part that he or she has contributed to, he or she cannot be part of the authorship. So to avoid disputes over attribution of academic credit, it is helpful to decide early on in the planning of a research project who will be credited to authors as contributors and who will be acknowledged. So pre-agreement should be there. All authors must take public responsibility for the content of their paper. In this statement, we are saying must take, but now it is they are responsible for every part of the data that is being reported in the paper. Not only data, the content also. Maybe the content is picked from some other paper. It's having lot of similarity. Then also they are responsible for that. The multidisciplinary nature of much research can make this difficult, and this can be resolved by the disclosure of individual contributions. So if you have read papers, at the end of every paper there is a part where author contribution is mentioned. So in every paper, there is a portion where author contributions are clearly mentioned. So if a paper is multidisciplinary in nature, for example, an engineer and engineer or a medical scientist are working together, they can mention clearly where they have contributed, and they need to make this disclosure. Careful reading of the target's journals advice to authors is advised. So before you report your work, before sending your written paper for publication, you should always check the instructions to authors. So have you ever contributed, written a paper or sent a paper? No, you will eventually, maybe in 1 year, you may write your review article. In the next 2 years, you may be ready to write your research paper. So before you send it for publication, please go to the advice to authors. They are also called as, in every journal, you have a portion which says author instruction. So you should clearly follow the author instruction. Four criteria must be met to be credited as an author: substantial contribution to the study conception, data acquisition, analysis, and interpretation. Now, there is a caveat here, uh, sometimes people want to be part of the authorship. Maybe they have conducted some experiment, and that was a part of their job. Means, for example, somebody is operating a machine, right? A big machine, maybe XRD machine or some other machine. So essentially, that person is doing his or her job. But if he or she wants share of the authorship, that is an unethical practice, because he is only helping you in acquiring the data, which is a part of his or her job. So substantial contribution to study conception and design, data acquisition, analysis, and interpretation are the criteria that anybody has to follow while giving away authorship. So drafting or revising the article for intellectual consent, approval of the final version, agreement to be accountable to for all aspects of the work related to accuracy or integrity of any part of the work. So agreement to be accountable. So now becoming an author on any paper is not so easy, because we are giving an agreement that we'll be accountable for a particular piece of work. So there are three types of authorships that are considered unacceptable. All right. What are those? Ghost authors. Who are ghost authors? They are the ones who contribute substantially but are not acknowledged. They are writing these papers because they are getting paid for writing these papers. So, what is the harm? I mean, they are earning. What is the harm? Sorry? But the paper is getting published in your name or my name, right? And I did not, it's not my original writing that I am reporting, right? It's not, the data obviously has not been analyzed by me, but I am reporting that because I am an author on that paper. So, most authors, even though they are getting paid for this work, they need to be acknowledged if we have used their services, right? Then we have guest authors. Who are guest authors? Guest authors are the ones who have not made any discernible contributions, as in conceptualizing the design, study or drafting the manuscript, but are listed to help increase the chances of publication, right? So, how do you harvest these guest authors? How do people find these guest authors? So they go for, they survey the literature. They may include an author with the understanding that just including name of this particular author will increase the chances of publication. But that particular author may not have contributed much to the research publication. So guest authorship is also unacceptable. Gift authors. Who are gift authors? You just gifted an authorship to please somebody, right? Okay, maybe to please your co-supervisor, not co-supervisor, co-supervisor is already a part of your work. Somebody who was not associated with your study design, but because you were expecting a favor from that particular individual, you decided to give the authorship. So the person is part of your paper because you were expecting a reward in return, right? So three types of authorships are unacceptable. What are those? Ghost authors, guest authors, gift authors. Okay, it's not very visible. So these are authorship disputes. Is it visible to you? Authorship disputes. So these are the. This is the guide to authorship disputes and how to prevent them. So what on this side you have the action. So misrepresenting the scientist's relationship to their work is the action that has been performed. And what kind of action is it? Listing names of people who took little or no part in the research. So I'll share, I have this material in soft copy. I'll share this material. It's a book, short book on ethical guidelines of research publications. I'll share that and you will be able to figure out what are the ethical practices that have to be followed for authorship. This particular slide essentially talks about why we should not take up ghost authors, guest authors, and gift authors in the authorship, and what are the consequences that we are going to face. Are we going to face any consequences? Yes, we are going to face consequences because gifting authorship is a research misconduct, and there are consequences for getting involved in research misconduct. So, for gift authorship, there are some synonyms to guest authorship, honorary authorship, unjustified authorship, and undeserved authorship. So, what does it include? It includes among the authors inclusion of an author, an individual who does not fulfill the requirements for authorship. Pressured authorship. When do you get to get pressured for giving authorship? Do we get pressured to give authorship? Who can pressurize you to give authorship? Anybody who is in a position of power and can exert his or her power and can intimidate you. So that kind of authorship is also, you should not succumb to such pressures because this kind of giving away authorship is also a research misconduct. It's not an ethical practice. Then you have ghost authors. I already talked about ghost authors. We do not need to go through it again and again. Fragmentation. We had talked about fragmentation. Fragmentation is again salami slicing, right? You fragmented your big study with no impact on the final outcome of the study. So separate publication of various parts of the work which could have been assembled in one publication. Why would you have assembled it in one publication? Because the final outcome was not changing. So you could have as well made a good one good paper and published it. But you resorted to fragmentation, which is also known as salami slicing. Duplication. Duplication is publication of the same paper in different journals, right? without much alteration to its content. So is duplication of publications ethical practice? No, it's not. Right? So the author should, there are some guidelines for referencing. We'll talk about it in the next class because we need to take it in detail. We just talk about authorship. What are the unethical practices in authorship today? So gift authorship is considered to be a frequent type of misconduct. So out of all these authorship, unethical, unacceptable practices in authorship, gift authorship is the most frequently found misconduct. It often occurs with the aim of pleasing somebody so as to obtain some benefit or as a means of granting some advantage to persons connection with the author. So there was a case study wherein a person who had included a gift author frequently on his or his publications, when they were questioned regarding why a particular author is on the list of authors, and do you know when these gift authors become public? When they are questioned about these gift authorships, when will you be questioned about gift authorship? For example, you try to include a gift author in your publication, when will you be questioned? Because maybe somebody, I don't know whether you have included an author as a gift author or that author was genuinely a part of the authorship. When will you be questioned? Maybe the study was not planned well, right? That raised a red flag, right? So all the authors were called, and it was found that a particular author had a tendency of including the dean of the faculty as one of the authors. So is it a good practice to include HOD in the list of authors or dean of the faculty as a list of authors without any contribution? No. But it seems that the person thought that the chiefs have to be the part of authorship as default mechanism, right? So their papers were retracted because of this malpractice. Their data may have been correct, but just because they indulged in authorship misconduct, the papers were retracted from the literature. Okay, so some consequences can be for retraction of papers too. Okay. We talk about conflict of interest later. I want to talk about the meanings of these terms: fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism, because this is also something which we encounter on a daily basis with the published literature. So the misconduct in data analysis and data reporting is frequently fabrication and falsification of data. So what is fabrication? Fabrication is making up data or results and recording or reporting them. And falsification, what is falsification? It's manipulating research materials, equipment. Sometimes you may manipulate the timestamp on the machine which you had used for taking a reading, right? Maybe you're working with an ECG machine and you try to manipulate the equipment. So that will also be falsification of reported data or processes, the methods that you have used, changing or omitting data or results such that the research is not accurately represented or in the research record. So falsification, fabrication are two practices of misconduct which are generally associated with data recording and analysis. So these two practices should be avoided at all costs because they give rise to a spurious data set which is not useful to anybody. Okay, so I think I'll stop here. Okay, I'll give you some time to reflect on what we have talked about. Okay, so I'll give you some time to go through the material. Tomorrow we are going to talk about plagiarism, and we are going to talk about conflicts of interest, disclosure of conflict of interest. But before we go away for the day, I would want you to tell me what is the take home message. So the take home message, not tell me. I mean, some of the points I can get it from you, but the take home message today essentially is that whenever we design our work, we should have ethics. Following the highest standards of ethics should be the only way that we are going to follow. We should design our work appropriately. We should record our data in the proper format. At every step, proper quality control measures should be taken. Okay, analysis should have all during data analysis, the people who are well versed with analyzing the data should be part of that data analysis process. And once we are assembling the data for publication, we should write the papers on our own. We should avoid using authors who are not part of the authorship, should not be a part of the authorship list, and we should report facts. We should not omit data which was not adhering to our hypothesis, right? So if we have such kind of outlier data which is not adhering to our hypothesis, we should try to find out why we are getting that data, because that particular set of data may also give you a lot of clue about where your research problem is going. So any false data or any data which is not adhering to your hypothesis is a good set of data because it gives you a lead to follow something else too, right? Okay. So please go through your lesson, go through the material that will be shared with you on the group. I'll share some study content and material. And tomorrow we meet at 10:15 again with an idea of studying about why plagiarism should not be done, and what is conflict of interest, why it's necessary to disclose conflict of interest, and finally we'll take up case studies talking about the uh, how misconduct has been dealt in history. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. We did not get much time to interact. I don't know whether we are live now, so I will just move because I really like to interact with my students. I need to know their needs so that we will have a better understanding of what we are dealing with and who we are dealing with. You are not just, faceless, nameless research scholars for me. You are research scholars of integral university who are going to represent us in the public. So I need to know your names, you need to know me, you need to know that I always be accessible to you. If you have not understood something or if you need any help in your research work, I'll be there for you, right? So, but you please think it in this manner that you are representing Secret University, any data that you are going to generate, anything that you are reporting should adhere to the highest set of particles. Here we have a practice of giving a manuscript communication number. So before you can send your paper for publication, you have to take the manuscript communication number. So at that point of time, we have our own checklist, which lets us know whether you have adhered to the correct guidelines. So which guidelines you have to follow? Which guidelines you have to follow for publication? Responsible publication. Go, right? Commit your publication in the next year. You don't have to go here and there. Go to home guidelines, make a checklist according to home guidelines, find out whether you are reporting the data according to them, whether you are recording your data according to them, and then you are safe to report your data. Right? Where are you now? What's your name? Can we just quickly have a interaction? Yeah. So where is your place of work? Okay. So where are you going to work? Which area? Which department? So you are from chemical science. Place of work will be there. Huh? So yeah, again you are on work. So you have a business responsibility. You cannot be distracted. You cannot be distracted when studies of taking on thoughts because you are already leading the generation as teachers. Actually, you are by which department? So I think this entire lecture was more focused on pharmacy. Right. I mean, because there we are creating some practices which are going to affect human beings, satisfy human practices. So you don't need lessons on ethics because you study it as a part of your curriculum, right? So none of us needs new lessons on ethics. We just need know, bigger application of why we have to follow ethics and what will happen if we do not follow it. From which one? I or okay, I can figure that out. There are scientific why is sitting at the back? Actually, I'm thank you. Thank you for your time because we are investing a lot of time in this and I can see that you are not take your time to go to your phones and all. So it's a big burden on our minds. We are not able to access our phone. So sorry for that. had anything in the past, that's the second thing. You have to take the right message, which is you may have joined PhD for various reasons. I don't want to tell you those reasons, but the outcome should be useful to the people, right? To the society. Make it a goal that whatever difficulties of work that you are going to do, it should be so don't just wait कि अब मेरा जॉब चला जाएगा and बस आप लोग force wait for that. This should not be your guiding principle. Your guiding principle should be that whatever small piece of work I am going to do, it should be authentic and honest. Right? So please, take a pledge with me that you will follow ethics. Yes? Yes. Shortcut लेना आसान है but will not take it because आगे फिर बाधा बन जाता है हमारा यूनिवर्सिटी का भी काफी अच्छा रेपुटेशन है so we do not want to do productive practice. That is the idea of engaging you in stuff, right? Okay, do not I don't know where the attendance sheet is. Actually, this thing is so bad, no? I cannot see it. It was getting circulated, but I don't know where it is. Can somebody call the person who was? It should be rejected. It should be rejected. It should not be sent at the same time. Right? Today you decided to communicate your paper, but you decided to communicate the same paper to journal application. It should not be done because sometimes what happens, you may not know it. You may have one of the reviewers may be saying in both the journals. They come to know that you are wasting their time. Many people indulge in this practice, but it's not good and unethical. So you आपको क्या करना है आपको बता दो कहाँ से रिजेक्शन आना चाहिए या अगर वो रिस्पॉन्ड नहीं कर रहे यूनिवर्सिटी को लेकर टाइम राइट टू देम दैट वी आर ड्राइंग आर पीपल मैं क्लास में थी ना यहाँ पर ये लाइव क्लास है इंटरनेट पे आ रही है तो इसलिए my pen drive is somewhere. I don't know where it is. नहीं कोई बात नहीं मैं अभी तो यहाँ पर ही हूँ ना मैं मैनेजमेंट वाले ऑफिस
Pen drive, ma'am. Ma'am, it is there. Yes. Yes, ma'am.
It's so difficult to teach. It's so difficult to teach on this system because I could not see the thing. But I hope you people understood some of what I was trying to tell. इसको बंद कर देना कैसे बंद होगा? टोटल अंदर घुसा हुआ है। So strange.
Ma'am, पहले वो उसको फाइल से वो क्लोज कर दीजिए।
लोग केमिस्ट्री में फार्मेसी
मैं केमिस्ट्री स्टूडेंट हूँ आप
डालिया में
हाँ इसके साथ करना था
मास्टर सुपरवाइजर की उन्होंने बताया
but now she asked me yeah we were supposed to reach the lab also we were supposed to come to the lab to learn what we are doing right so let this time go are you in first year so we complete करो अपना coursework फिर आना lab में काम
केमिस्ट्री में थोड़ी सी हेल्प लेंगे
हाँ ठीक है we are already
I know even पुराने में आपके क्लास के
whatever kind of
it's fine. So that's why I believe if I MSc because of your lecture. I used
But
to be
today
getting.
it was so, unstructured. I could
So
not see
you
your
will
face.
always around and that's
I
why.
like to move around and interact. Put me on night, so it must be a mess. Put this section on night. Natural style.